Playing video games in the 8-bit era was a completely different experience than it is today. And just hang on a second, I know everyone out there just went, "Oh really?" loud enough to wake their neighbors. Because yeah, that's a pretty duh statement. I mean, of course, playing video games today with Xboxes and PS5s with wireless controllers and 4K 120Hz TVs, it's going to be a different experience than almost 40 years ago. You know, I really should follow up with that guy that keeps calling me from the funeral home. Sorry, where was I? Yeah, these days, I mean, you don't even need silly things like cartridges or discs or manuals. You know what? Forget I went down that road because that's like 20% of these videos. The whole point is, in the 8-bit era, the technical capabilities with the hardware that the developers had to work with just could simply only do so much graphically and sonically, even with the most talented programmers that money could buy. So, game companies had to get creative. If they couldn't get gamers invested in games due to limitations in graphics and sound, well, what about using different types of controllers? Atari had the paddle controllers as an alternative to the basic joystick, and Nintendo famously had the Light Zapper, Rob the Robot, and later on the Power Pad after they'd bought it from Bandai. But what about Sega? Well, they too had a light gun, the Phaser, instead of the Zapper, a set of 3D glasses that were actually pretty cool for the time, and then one first-party controller that the NES didn't have, the Sports Pad. But fancy controllers are nothing without actual games to play on them, which brings us to this week's review, the humbly named Great Ice Hockey. However, I should probably pause for a second because I'm sure that there's some of you out there that don't know me and are thoroughly confused as to why I'm talking about useless hunks of 40-year-old plastic that sell for stupid amounts of money on eBay. Hi, my name is Dave, and welcome to Zilog and Moto, the channel where, instead of trying to glamorize old ideas for controllers that were only somewhat functional, I'm out to collect and review the nearly 1,280 titles released in the English language for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega or Mega CD as the case may be, and finally the 32X. Basically, if I can plug it into a Genesis, either by itself or with some sort of add-on, and be able to read what's up on the screen, I'm trying to get a copy of it and review it for posterity with both looks at that original packaging and gameplay captured from original hardware whenever possible. Trackballs had been in use in the arcades for years before the release of the Sports Pad, and with Sega's close arcade ties, it made sense that they would try to sell a trackball-based controller to home users to give players another way to feel like they were in the arcades. However, rather than use the trackball controller in action titles, like say Centipede or Millipede, Sega reached all the way back to Atari football and decided that the Sports Pad's primary use should be in, well, sports games. To that end, Sega would end up releasing 3 sports titles for the Master System that would support the Sports Pad. Great Soccer, which I covered way back in episode 24, Sports Pad Football, aka Great Football, and finally today's game, Great Ice Hockey, released in the United States in December of 1986 to really take advantage of Christmas that year. However, there's one thing special about Great Ice Hockey, and that's the fact that, unlike Great Soccer and Great Football, the only way to play Great Ice Hockey is with the Sports Pad. Will that prove to be a problem today? Spoiler, yeah. But I've got some ideas to maybe get around that. First though, let's take our customary look at the package, and then we'll get into what you may or may not have to do if you're interested in playing Great Ice Hockey in 2024. And here's my copy of Great Ice Hockey for the Master System. This one is a more recent addition to the collection, as it's actually somewhat hard to find as far as Master System sports titles in the United States goes. The hang tab has been removed from the top of the case, but thankfully the rest of the outer cover has held up well. Unfortunately, there is some wrinkling from some water damage on the inner cover, but most of that's on the rear cover, and I've certainly seen a lot worse. For a game like Great Ice Hockey, I certainly don't care about having a mint copy, so this one will do for me, but if you happen to be looking one for yourself and your collection, they're running from between $25 and $30 right now, which is in line with it being an uncommon sports title. As far as the front cover goes, I know I've gone on record as not loving the art from this simplistic era of the Master System, but in this case I kind of dig it. A goalie fiercely staring down a puck flying past looks a lot cooler than, say, the random leg that adorns the cover of Great and/or World Soccer. And with the old school goalie mask, I get a Garth Algar or, if you look at the eyes, an intense Jason Voorhees vibe. Also to note on the cover, this is listed as a Mega cartridge, and it is indeed a 1 megabit release. But more importantly, if you check out that pink star, it does indicate right up front that the Sega Sports Pad is required. More on that in a bit, but they are not lying, as the game is not playable with any other type of controller, or at least it wasn't when it was originally released. One other final note about the front cover: normally this is the part of the review where I compare the cover art on the North American version to the other versions of the game, but being that Great Ice Hockey is a North American retail exclusive, there is no other cover art to compare it to. And to be clear, yes, technically the game did make an appearance in Japan as a send-away offer. However, that version of the game came in a plain white box with no cover art. And if you want to know more about that, I recommend checking out 8-Bit Boy UK's video on Great Ice Hockey, where he covers some background info on that version of the game, and I'll put the link in the description below. That video apparently just came out last month, and honestly, I had no idea that he'd put it out. So it was just random chance that I decided to do this video now, but definitely go check him out and his channel if you're into the Master System. Flipping over the back, and with it being a North American release, it's just English back here, so no need to pull out the magnifying glass to read the text. These early releases, when reading the flavor text, it always seems like they've been written by some sort of beat poet, with as choppy and as abrupt as they are, with lines like, "Because your mean opponents mean business," and "Tackle one another, scramble for the puck, drive relentlessly for a goal." I just get an image of William Shatner in my head when reading this stuff. Finally, there's the 2 traditional screenshots at the top, but rather than clean, properly cropped pictures, they were clearly just snapped from some camera and thrown on there. It's not like this is the most graphically impressive game in the world, but this isn't really helping their case either. Opening up the package, and the manual and the cartridge are in good shape. There's not a whole lot of need-to-know information in here, but the manual does confirm 2 things that are interesting. Each of the teams are not identical from a difficulty standpoint, and apparently if you're playing the computer and your game ends in a tie, you lose. Not sure why you couldn't just go to overtime like it does in 2-player mode, but that's certainly a choice on the programmer's part. Okay, that's the package. Let's pop this in and see if I'll have any luck playing this game 37 years after it was originally released. I mentioned earlier that I've previously covered Great Soccer, both the Japanese and North American versions on the channel, and there is a distinction there, as Great Soccer, just like with Great Baseball and Great Golf, had 2 totally different games released under that name. And if you live in Europe or Japan, the game that I'm referring to as Great Soccer is actually known there as World Soccer, because Sega actually released both versions of the game in those regions. Anyway, the whole point of that is, if you're playing Great and/or World Soccer, you actually have an option. You can either play the game with a regular gamepad, or you can play the game with the confusingly named Sega Sports Pad, i.e. the trackball controller. I actually bought a sports pad specifically for that purpose and to try it out, and the results, well, they weren't great, so I fell back to just using a regular gamepad. Sega's 2 other games that support the Sports Pad come in 2 different variations. While Great Soccer/World Soccer, or even Sports Pad Soccer if you have the later Japanese release, supports the Sports Pad out of the box, Great Football actually came in 2 different versions, the standard Great Football and then a separate release called Sports Pad Football, with the games being virtually identical except for which controller that you use with them. Today's review, on the other hand, is for the only one of the 3 games that was designed exclusively for the Sports Pad. And by default, there is no other way to play Great Ice Hockey unless you have a Sports Pad. You can try if you want, but the end result will be that your player is always moving diagonal on the screen, because the Master System doesn't understand how to translate the gamepad signal into the signal that it would expect to get from the Sports Pad. This is due to the fact that the Sports Pad is technically an early analog controller, rather than a digital controller. If you actually take apart a Sports Pad to clean it, or just otherwise inspect it, you'll see that there's two rollers that the pad uses to track X and Y movement. But not only are those rollers tracking what direction the ball is moving, it's tracking just how fast the ball is moving, which translates to how fast your players will move on the ice. While it's a cool idea in theory, just to be blunt, these controllers don't really work very well in practice, and especially not 40 years on. Also, and this could have been just me, but when I plugged in the Sports Pad into my Master System 2, it didn't seem to function. Now, I couldn't find anything online about the Sports Pad not being compatible with the Master System 2, and that's probably because I'm one of the only people out there that's crazy enough to try to test it, so I don't know if this is a me problem or if it just simply won't work on the updated hardware. But if you happen to go down this road, just be wary that it might be an issue for you. The problem went away when I pulled out my original Master System, and I was able to start up a game, but it still wasn't a great experience as there's two problems. The first problem is that the two buttons on the Sports Pad don't appear to have anything buffering the buttons to the internal switches. Now, normally you would have a spring or some other rubber membrane between that gives you some feedback on the button presses, but on the Sports Pad, contact is very flat and not really conducive to high-speed action. Beyond that, apparently these Sports Pads are known for losing sensitivity over the years, meaning that you'll have to move the trackball more to get the same response on the screen. Just to ensure that I had the best possible gameplay, I did open mine up and clean it, but without having a minty fresh unit, it's hard to say how similar my experience was to how the game was originally designed. However, even with all of those issues, after I had messed with the Sports Pad for a bit, I think I got a good feel for what Sega had originally intended for with Great Ice Hockey. I started with the game's default match, which has you playing as the United States versus Poland, the worst rated of the 7 other international teams. Play started, and the feel was of a pretty standard early 8-bit hockey title, with the game accurately featuring 6-on-6 action, and the computer controlling which player you have selected based on the proximity to the puck. The only problem was that the in-game action is somewhat quick, which normally would be a good thing for a hockey game, but when you factor in how the Sports Pad works, you end up feeling like you're playing catch-up the entire time. When you do manage to grab the puck and start to move around the ice with the trackball, there's a rush that can kind of come over you, because the speed at which you roll the trackbar directly relates to how fast your player moves on the ice. Hockey in real life is one of those sports where things can change on a dime, and a player breaking away down the ice is one of the more exciting elements to the game. Having that speed tied to you as a player while hammering on the trackball in a certain direction just feels right. It's hard to describe unless you've played another game that involves spinning a trackball for speed rather than just a mouse pointer. There's just two problems with this. The first goes back to how I mentioned that the Sports Pads reportedly lose sensitivity over the years, meaning that chances are, even though I like the concept of the faster I spin, the faster my player moves, that might not exactly be what Sega originally intended when setting up the game. The second issue is, while the control scheme works once you've gotten the puck, the rest of the game, when you're chasing the computer player around, it's very difficult to change direction and keep up with your opponent, to the point where, even in that easiest possible matchup with the US versus Poland in junior difficulty mode, the game is virtually unplayable. And never mind the fact that your arm is probably going to tire quickly from all that rolling. I try to cut these early Master System titles a lot of slack because, especially with a game like Great Ice Hockey, they were trying to do something new and different with a console that still had a long time to go before the developers could really master what they could do with it. But in this case, with even the easiest possible game and the easiest game mode being a futile effort, that was a problem for me, and if I was strictly reviewing the game as it was originally released, this would be no more than a 1-star effort and possibly even a total bomb. However, that doesn't really seem fair, does it? I mean, if I could confirm that I was playing the game 100% as it was originally intended, and it still played that same way, then that would be one thing, but I can't. I think it's time to bend the rules a bit. Enter a person who goes by the call sign of BCNAble76 on the website SMSPower.org. Now, if you're not familiar with them, SMSPower.org is probably the best site on the internet for the Master System, at least from a technical information perspective. So if you want to know more about the Master System and its library, I definitely recommend you check it out. Every year, SMSPower has a ROM hacking competition, and in 2019, BCN Able 76 went outside the box, literally, because everyone else that year decided to hack Alex Kidd in Miracle World for some reason. And instead, he created something truly useful, a version of Great Ice Hockey with redesigned controller inputs, allowing players to finally be able to play the game with a standard gamepad instead of the Sports Pad. FYI, all the video that you've been watching of the game in action comes from that hacked ROM, if you're curious. I suppose I could have included footage captured from me attempting to use the Sports Pad on an actual console as well, but I didn't really see the point, as it would have just shown me losing terribly against the computer, and my original Master System doesn't have that jail bar fix installed, so I try to avoid capturing from it unless I really have to, because it ends up looking a little bit ugly. Using that hacked version of the game, you can concentrate a little bit more on playing it, and what's actually included. The game features 2 game modes, and can be played in either single player against the computer, or in one-on-one fashion against a second player. I'm not sure how much that mode ever got played originally, as it would have required you to have 2 Sports Pad controllers, but it is there, and in 2-player mode, each player can choose any of the 8 included national teams. Whereas in single-player mode, you will always play as the United States versus a second team of your choosing, with the teams conveniently being listed from easiest to most difficult. And if having variable team difficulty isn't enough of a challenge, you can also choose from 2 overall difficulty modes, in junior or senior difficulty. Finally, Sega included one last option, and that's for how long you want the game to last, with 3, 5, and 10-minute periods being available. In my experience, I think that 3 3-minute periods was a good length, as that gives you a game that lasts about 10 minutes in real time, but I could definitely see the desire to have a longer game in 2-player mode. With it being such a simple early sports title, you'd probably not be surprised to learn that the game only consists of single one-on-one matchups, whether that's against the computer or the second player. There's no season or tournament mode, it's just play a game of hockey, and then when that's over, it's back to the start menu to play another one. And honestly, that's okay when you consider the fact that this was only a few months away from being a launch title for the Master System in the United States, and it predated Nintendo's own ice hockey by a year and a half, while providing full 6-on-6 play and more teams than ice hockey did. One complaint that players might have about Great Ice Hockey is how the rink is set up, and this is something that NES ice hockey fans can argue makes that game better. Rather than having the screen smoothly move from left to right to follow the action, Great Ice Hockey sets up the ice as 3 specific screens, 2 featuring each goal and then 1 for the middle. The problem with this is, every time the action moves between the screens, there's a brief pause as the screen resets, and it can make the game feel a bit choppy. It's not as big a deal if you're playing with a gamepad, but if you're playing the original Sports Pad version, it does make the game feel that much harder to keep up with and control. Other than that though, the simplicity of the game works pretty well, with 1 button being used for shooting and 1 button being used for passing. I really only had one complaint about the controls, and that is that you control the goalie as well, while being in control of a highlighted possession player. What this means is that when the opponent has the puck in your zone, you have to make the choice of whether you just concentrate on trying to play goal and hope the computer helps you with a rebound or getting the puck on their own, or try to grab the puck yourself before the computer can shoot it, risking being out of position to make the stop. Against the easier teams, you can be more aggressive, but step up to one of the better teams, and you better keep a close eye on that goal. I think I would have preferred a simple game like this to have an auto goalie, especially considering the original control mechanism, but I at least understand what they were trying to go for. The graphics in the game are about what you would expect from an early 1MB Master System title. Nothing special, and the aforementioned splitting of the ice into 3 individual screens is a bit of a bummer. But again, we're talking about December of 1986 here. To their credit, the game has a good use of color, although how they came up with the uniform colors for each of the national teams is a bit of a mystery. There's none of the single line flickering that tended to plague Master System titles, And I like the scoreboards on the end of the ice to keep track of the game's score, complete with how many goals were scored in each period. More or less the same can be said about the game's sound, in that it's pretty typical of the time period and the amount of space. The sound effects in the game are minimal at best, with most of the sound consisting of the background music that plays throughout the game. The music is fine, but it will get old after a bit, and I would have liked to have heard a few more effects, like maybe a clink when the puck goes off of a post, or something when a goal is actually scored in the net. Instead of that, when choosing a country, you will get their national anthem played, which I do like, and it reminds me a bit of Epic's Summer or Winter Games. If I'm being brutally honest here, Great Ice Hockey is a nice concept for a simple hockey game, especially for the time period, but it's ruined by a gimmicky control scheme and controller, and is all but impossible to play in its original form in the current day. And if that's what's being reviewed, I can't justify giving the game more than 1 star. However, if you want to dig a little deeper and experiment with the gamepad version of the game, there's a fun little hockey game here. And it's a game that I think with a proper control scheme would garner 2 or maybe even 3 stars, especially when you factor in just how early of a release it was on the console. Okay, and that's it for Great Ice Hockey for the Master System. So far, things haven't gone too well for the Sports Pad supported games on the console, and Great Ice Hockey really could have benefited from an official version that supported a traditional gamepad, like Great Soccer and Great Football. But I guess that wasn't going to help Sega sell hardware accessories in Christmas of 1986. I'm not sure it's worth even bothering with Sports Pad Football, or if I'll just stick to Great Football instead, but something tells me that I'll probably cover both of them anyway, just for completion's sake. Next time on Zilog and Moto, it's one of those games that I know nothing about. Always exciting times here on the channel. This one in particular is on the Sega CD, as we've only done 1 review for the Sega CD so far this year, and it's June, so definitely time for another one. It's funny, I had originally picked out Black Hole Assault, another title that I know nothing about, but then when I was writing the script, I found out that Black Hole Assault is kinda sorta the sequel to Heavy Nova, and since I haven't reviewed Heavy Nova yet, I decided to skip it and pick another game. Instead, it's a game from the same developers as the supposedly worst Asterix game on the Master System, so here's to hoping they had their A squad working on this one instead. Well, that's it for Zilog and Moto episode 242. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you are so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later!